Welcome to the Balkan Buffet. In today's episode, I will be discussing the Zadruga. No, not the reality show, although I am very interested in exploring that topic later on. The Zadruga was a traditional communal family unit unique to the Balkan region. I will uncover their origins, why they were important, and the intricacies of their social structures, including the role of women in a Zadruga. I'll also discuss how Zadrugas were used by both the Serbian left and far right in nation building attempts. Join me on this feast as I delve into this unique aspect of Balkan history. The Zadruga was a traditional communal family unit and it has very deep roots in the Balkans. Its origins have been debated among scholars, although some believe that they originate with the early Slavic tribes. Zadrugas were large cooperatives where multiple generations lived and worked together. These units were primarily agricultural and were structured to ensure the mutual support and collective responsibility of every member. Early scholars focused on Zadrugas have tended to other the South Slavs and use their behaviors to distinguish the South Slavs from other civilized European nations.
The word Zadruga was coined by Vuk Karadžić, a 19th century Serbian philologist and linguist, in his dictionary. So the word Zadruga comes from the Slavic word for association or a cooperative. Zadrugas served as a basis of social order and were rooted in patriarchy. So Dr. Hristov in his 2022 article states that the origin of the Zadruga may have a very distinct past and roots in the culture of the ancient Illyrians who inhabited the Western Balkan Peninsula starting in the 6th century BCE. Zadrugas were also unique in the region, and scholars tended to view Zadrugas as a archaic social structure fundamentally different from the European model. Furthermore, he states that the predominant approach among academics was to see family and kin groups among the South Slavs as remnants of early developments in human civilization. Specifically, Anglo-Saxon family structures tended to place equal importance on both the mother's side and the father's side when it came to things such as family lineage, emotional ties, and transfer of property or wealth, similar to what we see in the Balkans today. But Zadrugas were not this. It was very patriarchal. Everything leaned on the father's side. Whereas the Anglo-Saxon family structure had a household that tended to include only the nuclear family. So the husband, the wife, and any unmarried children not of age. And Zadrugas, as I've mentioned earlier, had sometimes close to 50, 60 members of a family living in one Zadruga. Zadrugas were very patrilineal, meaning that membership in the family derives from the father's lineage, and any transfer of property or wealth goes through the male kin. So this also extends to the Slava, which is an annual Orthodox Serbian ceremony where the household venerates their patron saint. It is a tribute to the first ancestor, again, on the male side, who was baptized into Christianity and the saint that presided over the baptism. The family's patron saint is therefore patrilineal, so only the males are allowed to carry out the Slava's rituals, and the patron saint is passed down from father to son to his son, and so on. Dr. Hristov argues that the Slava is important since the passing of the patron saint for generations strengthens the patrilineal family ideology, along with strengthening paternal power. Although academics tend to believe the Zadruga model for family organization are archaic in origin, Dr. Hristov argues that Zadrugas were never a part of the folk tradition among the South Slavs. Instead, he argues that the Zadruga was imposed by literary means when Vuk Karadžić coined the term Zadruga. His argument is that Zadrugas actually originated as a response to the Ottoman Empire. Specifically, the 18th century brought the expansion of Chiflik landowning as opposed to the previous Timar system, based in the non-hereditary form of land management. Within the Timar system, the Sultan would distribute temporary land grants to servants of the Sultan, including members of the military class, such as the Janissaries, and on rare occasion to high-ranking women in the Ottoman elite. The Chiflik system was brought about due to the Ottoman Empire beginning to collapse, and powerful military leaders started claiming land and passing the property to their sons. So these family units emerged as a way to cope with the challenges of rural life, which was based in herding or a mixed herding agriculture. Zadrugas allowed for the pooling of resources and labor to ensure the survival and prosperity of these families. Zadrugas were prevalent in the rural areas of what is now Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, and Montenegro. So let's dive into another dish and look at the structure and function of Zadrugas.
A Zadruga typically consisted of extended family, including grandparents, parents, and sometimes even cousins. The head of a Zadruga was usually the oldest male, known as a domacin, and he had authority over economic affairs and resource allocation, whereas his wife usually was the domaćica, and she was in charge of the household.
The Zadruga was generally self-sufficient, producing most of what it needed through farming, livestock raising, and handicrafts. The collective ownership of property meant that everyone worked together for the common good. The system fostered a strong sense of community and interdependence, which was vital in the often harsh and unpredictable rural environment. Dr. Flere and Dr. Kleinschek, in their 2013 article, state that due to the very patriarchal structure of the Zadruga, there were very strict codes on what behavior was acceptable or forbidden. Women, unfortunately, had almost no rights, but they did have their own separate social order within the Zadruga. The males were responsible for the economic running of the household. If an issue related to money or inheritance were to arise, a council of men would resolve that issue. Women, on occasion, could vote and voice an opinion, but only if the issue was rooted in things like household chores. So, yay! Women were tasked with running the household, taking care of the children, and performing household chores. Parallel to the domacin, or the male head of the Zadruga, was the domaćica, usually the wife or the mother of the domacin, who tended to be a sensible older woman and held responsibility for the female members of the Zadruga. She would resolve minor misunderstandings between female members, and she would also delegate the household chores between the women. The other female members were expected to show their respect and obey the domaćica's orders. If a domaćica couldn't perform her duties due to things like age or illness, ideally she would transfer her responsibility as a domaćica onto another experienced woman who would then be confirmed by the domaćin or the council of the Zadruga. Although assets acquired during the duration of a marriage are jointly owned, a woman could not freely dispose of her own dowry as it was managed by the husband or the sons following the husband's death. Since the land was inherited from the male ancestors, the males in the Zadruga were obliged to preserve the land and increase the property that they could leave to their male descendants. A 2009 paper by Dr. Kulauzov states that all male adult descendants were entitled to a right in the cooperative. Interestingly, the cooperative could refuse the right to any males they viewed as being lazy, wasteful, or a male who was a perpetrator in a criminal act due to the potential of the Zadruga's reputation being hit. In Bulgaria specifically, the author states that a male could establish a household only if the father gave his permission, but if the father passed away, the male was free to do whatever he pleased. So now, let's taste another dish and look at the importance of Zadrugas within the Balkans.
Zadrugas played a crucial role in the social and economic life of the Balkans. They provided a stable structure for managing land resources and ensuring that families could thrive despite external pressures such as wars, invasions, and natural disasters. The communal nature of the Zadruga also helped preserve cultural traditions and fosters a strong sense of identity and continuity.
In addition to their economic function, Zadrugas were important cultural institutions. They were centers of social life where traditions, folklore, and customs were passed down through generations. For example, the Slava. The Zadruga system also promoted social cohesion and collective responsibility. Dr. Stojanovic, in her 2020 paper, states that Zadrugas practice collectivism, defined as the superiority of the community and giving superiority to the community's interests over the individual or the individual's interests. This collectivism allowed the Zadruga to function, according to the ethnographer Sima Trojanovic, as a quote-unquote well-oiled machine, where what one individual does is very much tied to another section in the machine and affects all the other members. This collectivism works until one individual starts calculating and realizing that they would be better off alone, and they slowly start to separate themselves from the collective Zadruga. This in turn creates divisions and infighting for who gets to claim property and ownership. According to Dr. Stojanovic, the domaćin is responsible for the thinking of all members of the collective. So the Zadruga protects the members, but in turn, the members must sacrifice their individuality to the community. So why did the Zadruga system start disappearing?
Zadrugas started disappearing in the late 18th century. Modernization was the beginning of the end of Zadrugas, and Tito's Yugoslavia following World War II embraced communist ideals such as the equality between men and women, which threatened the very patriarchal nature of the Zadruga.
According to Dr. Flede and Dr. Kleinschek, the Zadruga system was a way of life and a persistent institution. Although it was rarely documented in scientific evidence. For example, most Zadrugas, also called Afis, were documented in the Kosovo region. In the mid 19th century, Zadrugas were about 13 to 17% of all family systems in a few villages in Croatia. Bosnia and Herzegovina, Macedonia, Montenegro also had some Zadrugas in less developed parts. Slovenia practically had no Zadrugas, and they practiced more matrimonial and German-type feudal systems. Why did Zadrugas start disappearing in the late 18th century? The authors argue that one of the major reasons Zadrugas started becoming less popular among the South Slavs is due to modernization. The disappearance of serfdom led to a shift in monetary economy. Lots and farmsteads became fragmented, and farmsteads started taking on loans and started experiencing defaults. The authors argue the market changes led to changes in how society was divided and an increase in individual and property rights, as well as social upheavals. These all led to the disappearance of the Zadruga system. Additionally, the formation of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia following World War II and the rise of communism led to even further decline of Zadrugas. There were efforts to modernize Yugoslavia and incorporate communist ideals, which included the equality of women and men and their right to dignity. These rights are antithetical to the patriarchal structure of the Zadruga. The government was pushing for the schooling of girls, promoting higher education. They allowed for the institution of divorce, which was only previously existing in regions with Hungarian law. And they also pushed for the employment of women. The authors argue that massive industrialization and the decline of rural living lowered the number of children being born. The 1965 quote they use by Somerville is perfect in summing up the decline of the Zadruga. The quote goes, "Each new highway and rail connection reduces the isolation in which differences in family patterns deepen. This is what breaks that well-oiled machine. Each new highway or railway sparked a piece of that machine to gain individuality and wreak havoc on the entire Zadruga. One of the few remaining large Zadrugas were found within rural Kosovo in the 1970s, with around 50 members, and some within Bosnia in the 1960s with around a whopping 60 members among Serb families. Macedonia also had some 18 to 25 member Zadrugas in the 1970s. So although Zadrugas seem like a rarity, Serbian politicians on both the left and the far right use the Zadruga as an ideal system when thinking about what type of nation they wanted to build.
The Zadruga was positioned as a key political ideal to the Serbian socialists and the Serbian fascists in the late 19th century, although Zadrugas were already quite rare during that time. We'll see how the Zadruga was used to win over the poor rural masses and the effects of the pro-Zadruga rhetoric on Serbia. My intent is to show that we should be wary of leaders who use the past when trying to gain political support. And this can be seen even in today's political system.
According to the 2020 article by Dr. Stojanovic, the fundamental political question in Serbia since the 19th century has been, which type of state will emerge following Serbian independence from the Ottoman Empire? On the socialist side, the author states that Svetozar Markovic emerged as a leading voice. Markovic lived from 1846 to 1875 and was a Serbian political activist, literary critic, and a socialist philosopher. Being educated in St. Petersburg, his desire was for Serbia to avoid following the path of Western European nations, and believed that pre-modern institutions are better suited for freedom and equality. Only the popular state could deliver complete social equality, which for him was a prerequisite for attaining political freedom. The popular state is a reaction to the early formation of the modern state. The reason for this is that the modern state caused the peasant class to be disintegrated and pushed traditional institutions like the Zadruga to decline. Using the Zadruga as an inspiration, Markovic sought to form a state based on popular sovereignty, which included abolishing the division between those who govern and those who are governed, and creating a federation of municipalities akin to the extended family Zadruga, in which there is a council of men who govern themselves. He went even further and sought to abolish all ideological professions in society. Some of these include judges, legislators, lawyers, policemen, soldiers. So, a lot of people included in this. And to replace the ideological professions, Markovic proposed that manufacturing workers would be equally capable of doing the jobs that are done by those so-called specialists he sought to abolish. He expected every citizen to be a defender of his country, similar to every male member of a Zadruga being expected to defend their Zadruga. The author further states Markovic adopted the structure of the Zadruga in which the popular state was akin to the collective owner of capital and the organizer of national production of Serbia. Like the domacin, or the head of a Zadruga, the duty of the popular state would be to ensure the equal distribution of wealth. Dr. Stojanovic uses the deputy of the assembly, Alexa Ratarac's quote, who said, quote unquote, "Serbia is a large Zadruga, and we are the representatives of this Zadruga, and it is better when more people decide what is to be done." Now, let's go on the other side. The Zadruga ideal also became popular with the Serbian extreme right following World War I and the founding of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, as well as following the economic collapse of 1929. Dr. Stojanovic states that Dimitrije Ljotić and Milan Nedić were the biggest proponents of using the Zadruga to form the Serbian state, and stressed that Zadrugas were a uniquely Yugoslav institution. Nedić argued that the collective nature of the peasantry would be used as the future social and political system. Ljotić envisioned a society being organized around professions where people, through their professional association, would make decisions and control all means of national production. The collective nature of the Zadruga would be an ideal where the professional associations would take matters into their own hands and relied on the so-called Serbian spirit to motivate them. Nedić, for example, stated that Serbia didn't need external ideas on how to form a state and should instead just rely on its own native Zadruga system. But, as Dr. Stojanovic states, there were hardly any Zadrugas left during this time, so how could a Zadruga be a focal point of the Serbian spirit when almost no one was truly experiencing life within one? According to the author, the Zadruga also became an economic ideal. For the left, the Zadruga was seen as a way to avoid going down the capitalist route and dividing society into those who govern and who are governed. In 1876, Adam Bogosavljevic wrote a proposal to the National Assembly that opposes the construction of railways as well as the closing down of forestry schools, the National Theater, the teacher training schools, foreign language schools, rhetoric schools, and music schools. The core belief was that collective ownership, like the collectivism presented in a Zadruga, protects against the influence of the West and against capitalism. For the Serbian right wing, the 1929 economic breakdown was a focal point and a call to just end capitalism and the crises that arose from capitalist economic systems. They argued that unchecked human behavior allowed within a capitalist system leads to complete chaos and eventual economic breakdowns. Unfortunately, the right wing's attack against capitalism was also accompanied by racist, anti-Semitic elements where Jews were seen as using capitalism as a lever in which they could govern. Finally, Dr. Stojanovic states the Zadruga became a social ideal within Serbian politics. For the left, the cooperative was seen as an egalitarian community where all individuals were equal and no class divisions existed. For the right, Zadrugas provided a hierarchical community with a strong authority, the domaćin or the elder leading the community being the strong authority. The leader, or the domaćin, is the master of the house, akin to the patriarchal or theocratic state. The state would be organized along the lines of a Zadruga, where the leader is obeyed without question. So let's conclude.
Zadrugas were a remarkable example of communal living and cooperation unique to the Balkan region. They provided stability, support, and a sense of identity for generations. While the Zadruga system has largely disappeared, its principles and values continue to shape the cultural, political, and social landscape of the region. One thing I hope you get from this very short introduction to Zadrugas is how they were used to build a nation and also show the dangers of politicians who promote taking a nation back into the past. I would love to hear if you've heard stories about what life was like in a Zadruga or have any knowledge on them. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Balkan Buffet. A wonderful thank you to your host for this feast is to please like, comment, or subscribe. Stay tuned for more deep dives into the rich and complex history of the Balkans. See you next time. Vidimo se.